Borders are where nations draw their lines, where ideologies clash, and where soldiers stand watch, ready to defend their homelands. But what if I told you that the fiercest battles aren't always fought between men? What if the enemy isn't bound by nationality, flesh, or time? Tonight we delve into a chilling tale from one of the most volatile borders in the world, the line dividing India and Pakistan. This story will challenge everything you believe about war, history, and the nature of reality itself. It's a tale where human courage meets forces beyond comprehension. A battle not for land or politics, but for survival against something unseen and untouchable. For centuries, the no man's land between nations has been a stage for the unexplained. Whispers of ghostly warriors, spectral armies, and the cries of the fallen still echo through the night. But what happens when those whispers turn into something real? Something that refuses to stay buried in the past? This is more than just a ghost story. It's a haunting reminder of how much we don't know about the unseen forces that shape our world. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, this story will stay with you. Because at the end of the day, it forces us to confront one terrifying question. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? Prepare yourself. What you're about to witness will blur the line between myth and reality. And once you step into this tale of phantom soldiers and haunted battlefields, there's no going back. This isn't just a story about war. It's a story about how the unknown can change us forever. The border between India and Pakistan has long been a symbol of division, hostility, and tension. Stretching across rugged terrain, it is dotted with heavily armed outposts, high fences, and constant surveillance. On most nights, the border is a silent witness to the invisible line that divides two nations. But on this particular winter night, something otherworldly shattered the uneasy calm. It started with whispers, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves on a windless evening. Indian soldiers stationed at a remote outpost heard it first. Faint and fleeting, the whispers seemed to drift on the cold air, growing louder and more insistent with every passing minute. Initially, the soldiers dismissed it as the wind, or perhaps an echo from distant villages. But then the whispers began to form words, speaking in fragmented phrases that no one could understand. Some sounded like pleas, others like commands, and still others like songs sung in a haunting, unfamiliar tune. The effect was chilling. Men who had faced the horrors of combat without flinching found themselves gripped by an unshakable fear. The whispers seemed to know them, their names, their fears, even their most private thoughts. Across the border, Pakistani soldiers experienced something eerily similar. At first, they believed the Indians were broadcasting psychological warfare tactics to unsettle them. But when the whispers started calling out in Urdu, with voices that seemed to come from all directions, their skepticism turned to dread. The whispers often came just before midnight, as though timed to exploit the darkest and quietest hours. One soldier swore he heard his late father's voice, urging him to leave the post and run home. Another claimed the whispers threatened him, promising unspeakable consequences if he stated his position. The whispers were only the beginning. A few nights later, an Indian soldier named Arun reported seeing figures moving through the no man's land, the stretch of barren terrain between the two sides. At first, he thought it was a patrol from the other side. But as he watched through his binoculars, he realized these figures were not ordinary soldiers. They moved in perfect unison, their outlines blurred and flickering, as though they were not entirely solid. When Arun raised the alarm, his comrades joined him at the observation post. Soon, the Pakistani side also reported seeing similar figures. Both sides accused each other of deploying special operatives in the dead of night. Messages were exchanged through official channels, with each side vehemently denying any such activity. Despite the heightened tensions, neither could provide evidence of infiltration. The mysterious figures left no footprints, no heat signatures, and no trace of their presence except the growing unease they inspired. The soldiers, hardened by years of service, began to feel as though they were caught in a nightmare from which there was no waking. As the nights grew colder and longer, the phenomenon escalated. Soldiers from both sides began reporting not just whispers and figures, but also the sensation of being watched, an oppressive, suffocating presence that lingered even in daylight. Men who had been posted to the border for years without incident suddenly started requesting transfers, or falling ill with inexplicable ailments. It was as if the land itself had turned against them, and something ancient and malevolent had risen from its depths. The tension at the border reached a boiling point one foggy night when a group of Indian soldiers on patrol reported coming under heavy fire. The sound of gunshots echoed through the misty air, and flashes of light pierced the darkness. The soldiers, trained to respond swiftly, took cover and returned fire. Their commander radioed for reinforcements, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Meanwhile, across the border, a similar scene unfolded. Pakistani soldiers, convinced that the Indians had launched an offensive, also reported an ambush. They too returned fire, believing they were defending their homeland. For hours, the sound of gunfire filled the night, punctuated by shouts and the occasional explosion. Soldiers on both sides described the attackers as shadowy figures, their movements unnervingly fast and erratic. Some claim these figures seemed to materialize out of thin air, blending seamlessly with the darkness. Despite the chaos, no one managed to land a decisive hit. It was as though the bullets passed right through the attackers. When dawn broke, the battlefield was eerily silent. Soldiers cautiously emerged from their positions, expecting to find bodies or at least evidence of the intense firefight. Instead, they found nothing. The ground bore no signs of the battle, no bullet casings, no blood, no footprints. The landscape was as untouched as it had been the day before. Confusion turned to fear as soldiers began piecing together their accounts. How could an entire night of combat leave no trace? Some speculated that the other side had used advanced technology to create holographic decoys. Others whispered that it was the work of spirits, restless souls of soldiers who had died in previous wars. The higher-ups dismissed these theories, insisting that the soldiers were experiencing stress-induced hallucinations, but the soldiers knew what they had seen and felt. Many of them began carrying religious artifacts and charms for protection, hoping to ward off whatever malevolent force had targeted them. Despite their precautions, the phantom ambushes continued, each one more harrowing than the last. On one particularly harrowing night, both sides reported simultaneous attacks by what they described as an unseen army. Indian and Pakistani soldiers later realized their experiences were identical. The same shadowy figures, the same untraceable gunfire, and the same overwhelming sense of dread. It was as if they were fighting the same enemy, an enemy that existed beyond the boundaries of human comprehension. As the phenomenon persisted, both nations decided to investigate. A secret joint operation was launched to explore the no man's land, a rare moment of cooperation born out of mutual fear. The team included experienced soldiers, intelligence officers, and even a few paranormal experts who had been discreetly brought in. Their mission was to locate and neutralize the source of the disturbances, whatever it might be. The investigation led them to an abandoned bunker, a relic from an earlier conflict. The structure was partially buried in sand, its rusted doors barely visible against the barren landscape. Locals had long avoided the area, calling it cursed. The team entered the bunker with trepidation, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The air inside was heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. What they found inside defied explanation. The walls were covered in writing, scrawled in what appeared to be blood. The messages were in multiple languages: Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, and English. Some were pleas for help, others were warnings to stay away, and still others were fragments of prayers. Personal belongings were scattered across the floor: helmets, dog tags, letters, and photographs. The items seemed to belong to soldiers from both nations, but their origins were decades apart. It was as though the bunker had become a repository for the memories and anguish of those who had fought and died in the area. Deeper into the bunker, the team encountered an inexplicable phenomenon. The temperature dropped sharply, and their equipment began to malfunction. Radios emitted static, and compasses spun wildly. Some team members reported hearing voices, commands being shouted, screams of pain, and even the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors. When one soldier attempted to take a photograph, his camera captured not his comrades, but ghostly figures, their faces contorted in agony. The deeper they ventured, the more intense the phenomena became. At the heart of the bunker, they discovered a sealed chamber. Breaking it open revealed a shrine-like space filled with offerings, old coins, faded photographs, and fragments of weapons. A tattered flag lay in the center, half buried in the sand. The air in the chamber was almost suffocating, and the team felt an overwhelming urge to leave. But before they could, a sudden gust of wind extinguished their lights, plunging them into darkness. In the pitch black, the voices returned, louder and more insistent than ever. The team members felt unseen hands tugging at their clothes, pushing them toward the exit. One soldier claimed he saw a figure standing in the chamber, a tall, shadowy form with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Panicked, the team fled the bunker, leaving behind their equipment and any hope of understanding what they had witnessed. The night was suffocatingly dark, as though the moon and stars had abandoned the heavens. The border was silent, save for the occasional shuffle of a soldier's boots or the distant howl of a jackal. The unease in the air was almost tangible, pressing heavily on every soldier stationed on either side. Then at exactly 3 a.m., the stillness shattered. From the mist that clung to the no-man's land like a shroud, shadowy figures began to emerge. At first, there were only a few, vague shapes that could be dismissed as tricks of the eye. But as the seconds ticked by, their numbers multiplied until the barren expanse between the borders teemed with a ghostly army. The figures seemed to float just above the ground, their forms flickering like flames, struggling to stay alight. Indian soldiers sounded the alarm, their cries piercing the air. Guns were trained on the advancing figures, and orders to fire were barked. Bullets tore through the mist, but the shadows did not falter. Across the border, Pakistani soldiers witnessed the same terrifying phenomenon. Panic rippled through the ranks as they too opened fire. The night exploded with a cacophony of gunfire, shouts, and the deafening roar of grenades. But the Phantom Army was unfazed. Each bullet passed through them as though they were made of smoke. And then the Phantoms retaliated. The air was suddenly filled with the staccato of gunfire and the blinding flashes of explosions. Soldiers dove for cover, convinced they were under attack. Yet when they peeked out from their positions, they saw no conventional enemy, only those shadowy forms. The Phantoms' assault was not limited to physical attacks. As the chaos unfolded, soldiers began to hear voices, shouts from comrades who had fallen earlier in battle, screams of loved ones long gone, and even their own voices, distorted and mocking. Some described seeing faces from their nightmares, twisted and grotesque, glaring at them from the shadows. Others claimed to feel icy hands grabbing at them, pulling them closer to the advancing apparitions. In one harrowing moment, an Indian soldier named Ramesh froze in place, staring into the mist. His comrades tried to pull him to safety, but he wouldn't move. Later, he whispered what he saw: his younger brother, who had died as a child, standing among the Phantoms, calling to him with outstretched arms. Across the border, a Pakistani soldier named Ahmed described a similar experience, saying he had seen his late mother begging him to come home. As the battle raged on, both sides began to notice something unsettling. The Phantoms weren't just targeting one side. They were everywhere, attacking indiscriminately. It was as though they bore no allegiance, no motive other than to perpetuate chaos and fear. Soldiers from both sides found themselves firing in all directions, the distinction between friend and foe blurred by the supernatural nightmare. By the time dawn began to break, the ghostly army vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The soldiers, physically and emotionally drained, staggered out of their positions to survey the battlefield. To their shock, there was no sign of the carnage they had endured. No bodies, no shell casings, no bullet holes, nothing. It was as if the entire night had been an illusion, but the haunted expressions on their faces and the trembling in their hands told a different story. The events of that night left both armies shaken to their core. Rumors spread like wildfire, carried by terrified whispers among the soldiers. High-ranking officials from both nations convened in secret to address the situation. The meeting was tense, with neither side willing to admit the full extent of what had transpired. But it soon became clear that they shared a mutual enemy, one that was not of this world. The decision was made to abandon the most haunted stretches of the border, Outposts were quietly dismantled, and soldiers were reassigned to less volatile areas. Official reports attributed the withdrawals to logistical concerns, but the men who had been there knew the truth. They knew they had encountered something that defied reason, something that could not be fought with guns or strategy. In the months that followed, both nations took extraordinary measures to suppress the story. Soldiers who had witnessed the events were sworn to secrecy under threat of severe punishment. Paranormal experts were brought in under the guise of geological surveys, but their findings, if any, were never made public. The bunker at the center of the disturbances was sealed with concrete and declared off limits, its exact location erased from official maps. Despite these efforts, the legend of the phantom soldiers persisted. Among the ranks of both armies, it became a cautionary tale, whispered during long nights on patrol. New recruits were warned about the cursed land and advised to steer clear of the no man's land, no matter what they saw or heard. Some soldiers carried talismans or recited prayers for protection, hoping to ward off the unseen forces that lingered in the shadows. Over time, the story took on a life of its own. Villagers near the border spoke of hearing gunfire in the dead of night, followed by an eerie silence. Travelers claimed to see figures in the mist, watching them with glowing eyes. Some even reported hearing the whispers of long-dead soldiers, recounting their final moments with chilling clarity. The most unsettling accounts came from those who ventured too close to the sealed bunker. They described feeling an oppressive weight in the air, as though the ground itself resented their presence. Some claimed to hear voices calling out from beneath the concrete, a cacophony of anguish, rage, and despair. For the soldiers who had survived that fateful night, the memories never faded. Many suffered from recurring nightmares, reliving the chaos and terror of the phantom ambush. Others experienced strange phenomena, even after leaving the border. Whispers in the dark, shadows that moved on their own, and an unshakable sense of being watched. Today, the border stands as a fragile boundary between two nations, but also as a reminder of the mysteries that lie beyond human understanding. Those who serve there carry an unspoken burden, knowing that the land they guard is haunted not just by the ghosts of the past, but by something far older and far more terrifying. What you've just witnessed is more than a story. It's a collision between history, belief, and the mysteries of the unknown. The haunting events along the India-Pakistan border remind us that some battles transcend borders, politics, and even time itself. They challenge us to reconsider the world we think we know and confront the unsettling reality that there are forces beyond human understanding. Phantom soldiers, spectral armies, and eerie apparitions, these aren't just ghostly tales for the campfire. They're echoes of the past, fragments of lives lost, and perhaps even warnings of what lies beyond. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, these accounts tap into something primal within us: our fear of the unknown, our fascination with the unexplained, and our need to find meaning in chaos. But more than that, these stories make us reflect on the human condition. Borders may separate nations, but fear, courage, and the mysteries of life connect us all. When faced with the unexplainable, we are reminded of how small we are in the grander scheme of things, and how much there still is to discover about the forces that shape our world. Perhaps the true haunting lies not in the ghosts of these battlefields, but in the questions they leave behind. What stories do our own actions write into the fabric of reality? What echoes will we leave for future generations to uncover? And are the phantoms of yesterday really so different from the shadows we face today? As we close this chapter, remember, the next time you hear a whisper in the dark, or feel a chill where there should be none, it might just be a reminder that the line between this world and the next is thinner than we think. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the unknown. If this story resonated with you, if it made you question or wonder, share it, because sometimes the most important stories are the ones we can't explain.